think we'll just kick off. Some of the writers would like to read from their work to demonstrate their thoughts. Others just want to talk to the topic. So we'll just go from left to right, starting with Claire G. Coleman. Thanks, Claire.
Well, I think in the question in that program, it's asking the wrong question. The question is, can people write from the point of view of another culture? The answer is yes, they can. The important question is, should they write from the point of view of another culture? And the answer most of the times is probably not. And the reason is because the dominant culture has had control of the narrative in Australia, the white cultures have control of the narrative of what this country is for 230 years. And finally, Aboriginal people and writers of colour are starting to, we're stealing the dialogue back from the white people. And I think, I've said many times that there'd be no problem with white people writing from Aboriginal points of view if they hadn't been the only people doing it for 230 years. If we'd had a chance to write our own stories first, then maybe it wouldn't matter that white people steal our stories now. On the other hand, it's a very complicated question because I've actually known white people who are given permission to write Aboriginal stories by the family or whose story it is, the person who has the right to the story, and then that's not my place to say. But generally, I'd say probably shouldn't. That's the simple answer, for which I could go on all day.
I think that when you live in a place like the Northern Territory where Aboriginal people are 25% of the population and very much a part of life, I think it's very different to places like Sydney or Melbourne when you can grow up and not meet an Aboriginal person in your entire life. I think up here we would be telling bullshit stories if we didn't have Aboriginal people in our stories. They wouldn't be stories about this place. And we all want to write from our place. We want to write about our lives. And I think because Aboriginal people are so much a part of our lives, that we live in a culture where British Irish isn't the dominant culture, where there's a huge population of Greek and Italian and Chinese, and I think we have to have stories from the Northern Territory that include all of those people.
Oh, when I start with the character, I just sort of like fall in love with this character, and then I sort of then start to flesh it out, and then I colour it in. And look, I'm writing at the moment about a Pakistani. I mean, how dare I? But yeah, it sort of fits within what I'm doing in the context of what I'm doing. So yeah, it's dreadful that all this sort of political sort of stuff happens around, but for me, I just write for the pure love of it, and I just love these characters because they're really beautiful characters that all sort of work really nicely together in my head space, and then I just sort of put it on paper and that's it. So it's pretty simple for me.
It's similar with Leonie. I didn't grow up in the Territory, but spent 13 years before recently moving to Launceston. But the first 2 years were in Tennant Creek. So coming from Victoria, it was like coming into another country, and it was someone else's country. You felt like you were, felt like it was overseas, even though English was spoken, everything was it was effectively a white fella settlement in a way, but all you're hearing around the streets is different languages. Same in Alice Springs, you're hearing so many different languages from all the many language groups in the Central Desert. And so there was a wanting to learn and explore and find out more about what it was like to live in that place, what it was like for those people to live in the place, and how it could interact. So it's that, and that's where the interesting part of, where two cultures meet is going to be where things happen. And it's happening in both ways. Culture's a fluid thing, not a static museum piece.
Yes, and the cultural interface situation is a complex one, of course. I was just remembering this morning Kate Grenville's work about her ancestors in the Hunter Valley and about some massacres they perpetrated against I can't remember the people, does anyone remember the people of that region? And she made the choice in her book, she didn't actually give voice or language to those First Nations people because she felt like it wasn't her right or place. And then when they went to adapt the work for theatre with Sydney Theatre Company, Andrew Bevell thought, no, actually, I'd rather look at it another way. So it's that complex thing of looking at the interface. And what he did is, well, I think we can probably find some speakers of the language. We can probably work with them. We can probably find some way so that their voices are stronger in the work. And Andrew, as most of you would know, is a non-Indigenous person, and he worked closely with those people to try and address that. So that's kind of the tricky part, is that interface moment. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Well, I just remembered, people. I don't think there's a single person from a minority in Australia who would not be happy to see more people from their culture in books. And I don't think any Aboriginal person would say, no, white people can't put Aboriginal characters in their books, because I think it's necessary to put Aboriginal characters in Australian books. On the other hand, you get last year, Thomas Keneally said he was really proud of writing The Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith, but he deeply regrets telling the story from Jimmy Blacksmith's point of view, because he believes he does not have the right, and he should have written it from the point of view of the police chasing him, for example. So then you've got this thing of maybe it's necessary for, like, up in the Territory, writing a story that Aboriginal characters would be being dishonest, but also probably dishonest if you write from an Aboriginal point of view rather than writing from the point of view of white people interacting with Aboriginal people. It comes down to whose voice you're writing in. Because I think you can write about a culture you don't understand or that you don't have the right to, but writing from a voice that's not yours is a slightly more fraught, a slightly more risky move, in my opinion.
It is very risky, and it's really difficult. And I think checking and rechecking with people and talking to people, and I just spent the last week down at Numbulwar reading the dialogue and reading parts of my new novel to the people who own the stories. And at some parts they'd just shake their head and go, no, she wouldn't say that, that's wrong, it's got to be this and it's got to be that, and how can we get that in? It was they're like supervisors, I suppose, to the novel. But I think if any character that you write, if you don't do enough research and if you don't know those people and you can't hear their voice, then you're not going to be able to write them successfully. But I think if you've lived with a group of people and you hear their voices, then I think that you can. And when you're talking to people and saying to them, what do you think about this? You're asking them, is this a fair representation of you? Mm-hmm. And if that person thinks it's a fair representation of them, then I think that's okay.
But what about the issue that a lot of Aboriginal authors talk about, which is, things have changed in the last few years, but it's been traditionally extremely difficult for Aboriginal writers, musicians, poets to get the privilege of being published. And if you tell that person's story, you're making it even harder for someone to gain that privilege if they haven't had the opportunity to tell the story themselves. And that's true of any minority voice. Every time you tell someone's story, the classic cultural appropriation problem. As soon as you appropriate someone's culture, it could be seen as two things. It could be seen as theft of something they could use themselves, or in some extreme cases, people have talked about works of literature being cultural assassination, because people get to know the piece of literature more than the people themselves and think that literature work is what defines those people. And therefore, you're killing a culture. Because people say, that's my culture. They go, no, it doesn't say so in the book. And
that's exactly right.
And the classic example of that is a book called Mutant Message Down Under. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it.
Yeah.
It's the highest selling a book about Aboriginal culture in European languages other than English. It's been translated and sold millions of copies in Germany, and it's supposed to be about an Aboriginal people, except it's written from imagination by a white woman who's probably never met an Aboriginal person. And she's sold literally bazillions of copies. And people have said that that book is cultural assassination, because people say that, because to people around the world, that is their definition of an Aboriginal person. And that's very, very risky manoeuvre.
It is. I agree. And it's a horrid book. It really is. It's a horrid book. And it paints a really awful picture of a people.
You know, as an Indigenous person, I don't consider myself to be an Indigenous writer. I'm a writer, and I like to write about Indigenous things. And I write about white people, and you know what? No one's complained once about me writing about white people. And I think as a writer, we have the need to respect what we're writing about and who we're writing about. And if we don't, sometimes, you know, you can tell if it's a bad piece of work, you know. I mean, I just think that sometimes we just get too worried about things. It's an issue that obviously disturbs a lot of people, but for me it's the writing, it's the joy of the writing and making sure that those characters are sort of like true to what I can do and research and understand them to be. And yeah, I don't have an issue with people writing about other cultures, but as long as it's done in a respectful and a kind way, like you wouldn't write about your family in a bad way. Why would you write about another culture in a bad way? And I have no problem with writing about white people or anyone else. I really don't.
I think that the problem has been, and maybe this is why we're having the discussion, is because historically that hasn't happened. And the way that Aboriginal people have been represented for the last 200, I didn't realise it was 230.
It's 230 years this year.
230 years, has been as other, as strange, as Stone Age, as not real people. The stories are not about people and their political and human interactions. It's about them as this strange otherness. And I think that's why we're having these problems nowadays, that people are saying, these stories, we need to start writing stories that are not only for a white audience. We need to write stories that are for Aboriginal audience as well. And in doing that, you need to have characters that are really filled out.
I was saying to the panel before, I mentioned two questions a friend of mine had up on Facebook. She's a First Nations writer and intellectual. Her two questions when she was thinking about this sort of stuff, working cross-culturally and cross-border, for whose benefit is the first question, and why you? So I just wondered whether the panellists had any thoughts on that. As some of you would know, I work cross-border with Indonesians a fair bit, and it's really good. I constantly ask myself those two questions, you know, because they keep, you know, we all have these, all writers have ethical problems all the time in what we write. And I don't know, it just helped me frame, you know, what am I doing in this space? Michael, do you have any thoughts on those two questions?
For whose benefit and why me?
Or if you want to do one and not the other. Like,
Yeah. I mean, I guess the first question, like any writing really, for whose benefit? It's for my benefit. I mean, hopefully, if it's good enough or whatever, then someone else will read it, enjoy it, get something out of it. But yeah, it's got to turn me on, in effect. If I don't get something out of it, then I'm not confident anybody else would, and probably wouldn't show it to anybody else. Which sort of answers the second question as well. I mean, it's me trying to come to terms with my vision of the world or imagination of the world, and what we imagine we create anyway. So It's a bit like Pessoa in a way, whatever you actually imagine, just like your dreams and that sort of thing, in a degree they're real, just like any other memory of a real event. So it's for me, and why me? It's because only I could create that, in a sense.
And from the short story collection, Michael, your encounter at Kalyakapi. So in this story, there are two white explorers wandering around the desert. They are a bit lost. They camp by a waterhole, and then a couple of men from a local tribe, approach them and are speaking and interacting with them. They give these white guys a bird, a page later, we hear what happened, and it's the people who speak Pitjantjatjara, but Michael hasn't sort of placed them within a particular tribe. They're talking amongst themselves, and they're talking about the white guys, and they say, "Those fellas, they gone mad, poor fellas. They walk everywhere. Gina going everywhere. Why don't they listen? I told them they are not welcome here right now. Take this bird and eat well, because you've got to leave. We've got ceremony business, lots of people coming. I told them which way to go, where they can get water, not north, nothing that way, but they've got to go more east. But they go north and west, wrong way, into that wide thicket of Kurka, poor fellas." So there's this interesting colonial kind of interface moment. So why write that story? What was your drive there?
I'm not exactly sure what drove the whole story from the beginning. It came as an image of a dead explorer in a dry riverbed covered with ants. That was just the first image, and then it just grew out from that. But it's influenced from not any real events, although there are elements of different explorer stories and journals within that. So the meeting that Jilpi, the old man, just described, like where they actually meets with the explorers finally, that is influenced from the journals of Stuart and the meeting he had at Attack Creek prior to them being attacked by the natives after Stuart had thought that they'd just been given safe passage through the land.
You're talking about the Attack Creek?
Yeah. So Stuart thought they had clear passage through the land because the old man had come and given him some fish, and so it has changed a little bit. Fish, and showed them where water was and that sort of thing. And then a couple of days later, it's like, here they are setting the bush on fire and throwing spears at them. Complete miscommunication. And I just wanted to subvert that a little bit. But I mean, it's all done. I mean, in the whole lot, it's the explorers who are foreigners in the country, don't know how to read it, don't know where they're going, only knowing that they want to get through to some good pasture or something somewhere, so that they can exploit that land, but also not interacting with the local people to either get safe passage through, to announce their place there, to I mean, as many explorers did, they treat the Aboriginal people like they're part of the flora and fauna. And it's the Aboriginal people in the story that are human and compassionate and everything else.
I just remember the way that history's been. If you look at things carefully, you see that history was written from one point of view only. You go to, there's a rest area called Attack Creek Rest Area, where there's a cairn and a plaque. The plaque says, essentially, I'm going to paraphrase because I can't remember the exact words. It says, that the explorers were turned back by an attack by the native people, essentially. And I've always wanted to go there and take that plaque off a place that one says, at this place, the Wawamungu people successfully defended their country and stopped the white people from penetrating for another 35 years. Because that's what really happened. The Wawamungu stood their ground at that spot and turned the explorers back. I mean, isn't that a great story? Rather than here the white explorers got attacked by native randomly. No, some people fought back and saved their country for another 35 years.
Claire was mentioning before the panel Keith Windshuttle, and many of you would be familiar with the history wars. Claire, can you fill us in on what happened there?
A few months ago, in a series of interactions involving being on the It's Not a Race podcast on the ABC and writing an article for the ABC, it turns out that Keith Windshuttle decided to start one of his quadrant editorials with a blatant direct attack on me. He even named me. And what his attack was that I claim that white people came, massacred everyone, that it was the invasion of the white people was an apocalypse. And I claim that, yes, there was nothing but bad things that came from white people coming here. And he said in his article, basically, Aboriginal people were better off once white people came, and how dare I, me, use the Western education and the English language to attack white people, because without white people being here, I wouldn't have a Western education or the English language.
But they're the only tools you've got to attack with.
Those are the only tools I've got to attack with.
Goodness.
So it has to happen that 2 days after that was in Quadrant, someone approached me and said, would you like to write an opinion column on anything? And I, of course, said, yes, I would love to. and my reaction was basically, essentially my reaction was, once white people took away our culture, they've left us with nothing but their own tools to fight back. And so that's what I'm going to use. As long as I live and breathe, I'm going to do that. Particularly Keith Windshuttle, because he's a dick.
Marie, you were talking before about your passion as a writer, and if you remember from Every Secret Thing, all of Marie's characters, it's a novel, but it reads like a series of short stories, novelish in that the characters keep coming back every now and then. But you get to know all of these characters so intimately. So it's set in the mission at Garden Point, and you're not only getting to meet the kids.
It's just a secret.
Oh, well, yeah, a fictional mission. But you also get to know very, very well one of the nuns and one of the priests, and you find out all their backstories, and it's like she has delved into every single character so intimately, and you feel both rage and warmth and sorrow for all of the cast she has in this book. And Marie, you were going to read from one of your works, weren't you?
What, now? Yeah. Well, this is going to be a lucky dip. I haven't marked any page, so I'll just open at random and start reading. How's that sound? Okay. Righto. Oh, here we go. This book here is my memoir, and it's about me going back and finding my family on Bathurst Island and the horrors that I beheld, and then in the end the joys that they became. So Lorraine and JJ head off to school every day but rarely make it and go off to their mates' places instead, like most of the kids do. Despite my nagging, they see no point in going to school because all the good jobs on the Tiwi Islands are filled by white people. I tell them, look at me, I've gone through school. But they stare at me askance like I'm confirming their reasons not to go. And they might have a point there. School obviously nothing for me. If I'm living like a black fella in an overcrowded house at admission in the middle of nowhere, absolutely. Panakua, which is my mother's dog. Panakua's name has something to do with Tangea, our place in the southwestern side of Bathurst Island that was named Cape Fourcroy by some French explorer by the name of Nicholas Baudin. Mummy tells me that I am to refer to Panakua as my brother. Brother? Although I've seen childless people treating their dogs like babies, this is the first I've heard of people referring to dogs as real members of the family. In addition to that, I call Auntie Ursula's 3 dogs my son, my son-in-law, and my daughter, and Auntie Beatrice's 2 dogs, my uncle and nephew. Each dog in our extended family is explained to me in kinship terms and the terms of acknowledgement I must use for them. But there is still the thought in the back of my head that they're having me on. I ask, what happens if different family members get puppies from the same litter? What happens then? But they explain patiently. If the litter of puppies belongs to my amane, for instance, I will always call the puppy uncle or auntie, no matter who they are living with. I realise after much discussion they are deadly serious about the dogs belonging to our family structure, and no one is pulling my leg.
Marie, thanks. That makes me think of another question for you around the ethics of writing. How have your Tiwi family responded? Every secret thing really unwrapped every secret thing. Like it.
Well, there were no secrets anymore.
No secrets anymore. And then your memoir, of course. How have your Tiwi family responded to your work?
Oh, in typical fashion, they haven't responded at all. So it's just like, wow. It's my story to tell. It's mine. It's my story to tell, and they trust me that I'm not going to sort of like do anything dangerous or bad to anybody. So. There was no objections. I told them I was writing the memoir because I thought, well, this is a bit closer to home. That's fine. You do that. And, they're fine with that. The only people that sort of like had any conniptions over the book being published with the white family. So that was...
It's always the white people who complain.
Well, no, it is, but they were really... No, true, they were a little bit... But they said to me, well, you should have crucified him. Why did you just do it? You should have done it worse. What did you do? Why didn't you write it so hard, So they were complaining that I didn't get vicious enough in my book. So,
I get that all the time.
Yeah.
People want me to be more vicious.
Yeah, this is the white mob now saying, why didn't you get more... why didn't you do this?
We've met with my publisher.
And Leonie brought up an interesting topic the other day. We were in Mikasa together, and Leonie's new work is Mikasa, Yungu, and European people?
No.
Mikasa and Yungu. What have been the issues there? I mean, that's further complexifying. How are you going with that?
Well, initially, I'll just start off with a little introduction of how it came about, because I'd been writing children's books under the supervision of my family for a long time. And it wasn't until one time we were all sitting around and we were watching 10 Canoes. And I realised everyone was spellbound with this story. And it validated them in a way that nothing else validated them. And we started, and afterwards we were talking about, people were telling all the stories of the time before white people came, and it was the Mikasa stories that I'd heard since I was a little kid. They were part of that story. And so I realised then that if the stories that I write, the stories that anybody writes in the last 230 years, Aboriginal people are always going to be the victims, because the white people did win. They killed huge amounts of people. It's their law that's in charge, even on remote communities where traditional law is still very strong. It's whitefella law that everyone has to live under. And whenever you talk to people, there's always a sense and an essence in all conversations you have cross-culturally in Australia that Aboriginal people were primitive when white people came, that the Stone Age sort of hierarchy that they used, that people understood in those days, which has been thrown out so many times, still is part of our psyche. And so I started talking to people about, could I write a story from the history of Australia from an Indigenous point of view? Is this something that would be good to write about? And everyone was very excited about the Mikasa story, because this is something they're very proud of. Like their interactions with Mikasans and before that the Baini were equal, they were strong. And Mikasan people did something wrong, Aboriginal people killed them. There was no way in the world they got away with it. And this is how those stories are told. Aboriginal people are always the victors. So we talked about you know, the story. And everyone wanted me to write the story because they trust me and because they like the books that I've already written. And I did say, you know, maybe it would be better to work with another Aboriginal writer. And one old man said to me, it's footsteps that are important, not blood. And I thought, well, yeah, that's fair enough. He knows me since I was a little kid. I know that I could never say anything that was going to make him angry because, he'd probably flog me even at my age. No, but he would be really angry, and that would be more than you'd want to cope with. So, where was I going?
You're going in the right direction. Keep going.
So that was the reason that I decided to do this project. But I am a writer and a storyteller, and I didn't have all of the knowledge of the historical background and how because I don't read historical fiction. I know more about Aboriginal stories that I was told as a kid. My mum never read us, white books, the books that other kids grew up on. We just grew up on stories, oral storytelling. And so, oh, God, I lost my way again. But anyway, that's how the story came about. That's why I wanted to tell the story. And I think that I chose in the end to tell the story from that I was the right person to tell the story because I'm the person who those people trust to tell the story. And I know that I can go there and sit down with people and read to them and they'll trust me to say, no, that's wrong. That's not the right way to do it.
Yeah, but you're a family, Leonie.
Yeah, well, that's
taken a different story for you, but yeah, you're a family.
And I think in a way that's something that's a bit complex too. When we first came up to Darwin from the community, and all my life I've had this really weird thing where white people come up to me and talk to me like I'm a white person. And it's, people say racist things to me. And I'm always really horrified and think, what? Where are you coming from? It's such a weird thing because I actually am coloured white, but I wasn't growing up in a white culture. So that's a weird complexity too.
That is weird, yeah. I mean, I often joke that people keep saying, you said earlier that white people won the war. Well, the war's not over for a start. It's not. There's no treaty, no peace. It's the war, the war of invasion of Australia is ongoing. But now we're fighting back, but we're fighting back using art and culture. And but art and culture, I don't know about everyone else, but I know my friends are going to win. So really, because but that's in the war. Yeah, the war hasn't ended, but I think the job of Aboriginal people is to Aboriginal writers is to slowly overturn the existing culture in Australia. That is our job, to try and overturn the existing paradigm, because for a start, when the English arrived here in 1788, 230 years ago, they'd already destroyed the environment in their own, on their own little island they lived on. Aboriginal people had lived here. People say Stone Age, whatever, that's bullshit, because if you think about technology, we could say that, it could be said that all the technology that we've picked up over the last couple of hundred years has done nothing but cause problems in society. If you think about Aboriginal people, 60,000 years without an environmental apocalypse in the harshest environment on Earth, isn't that something the rest of the world could have learned? And that's an important question, isn't it?
Claire, I think that I beg to differ, but it's not my job my job is to present my world from my own unique perspective.
Yep, fair enough.
As an Indigenous person. And if I can do that in my own way, quietly in the way that I write, or noisily in the way that I write, that's the way that I do it. And I'm not fighting anybody. I refuse to fight. I will just go on and do it the way that
But I think in a way you are fighting, although you might not be directly fighting.
No, it's not a fight. To me, it's just sort of
you're
like
fighting
changing.
for survival in a way, or survival of your stories.
No, I'm not.
No?
I am just wanting to present my world as an Indigenous person from my perspective. And if people see that and they learn something from it, I think that that's great. And if they don't, well, that's their loss.
Thanks, panel. We need to move to audience questions. And yes, there's someone at the back with their hand up.
This is a question to the whole panel, and to provide context to my question. So I'm a woman of colour and I'm also a child of same-sex parents. And so during the postal survey, I experienced my narrative being claimed by people who had no part in it. And it was a very painful experience. And even if they were to tell the narrative in a way that was loyal to it, they all did it towards some particular benefit or gain. And they're talking to a suffering that they don't have to live and that they can step out of, whereas I can't remove myself from my identity, I can't step out of it. And so I guess I wonder if there had, to all the authors, if you bore thought to the idea that you're almost visiting people's suffering and you're taking a story and you write a book and you gain social capital for it, you increase your professional career, and I don't know what happens to the subjects of the stories. Are they, you know, what capital are they receiving? Are you facilitating the magnification of their suffering and, I suppose, changing it? So you can be critical of colonialism but then benefiting it from the space that your story takes up rather than the subjects.
That's a bloody awesome question. I'm tempted to... Actually, I will swear, that was a fucking awesome question. I've actually encountered this before, and I've been in arguments with other writers about this before, because there's one thing that I absolutely despise, and that is writers who write someone else's biography and take all the copyright and all the credit themselves. When you write someone's biography, they are putting in an effort. It is their story, and they're telling you that, especially if it's a biography from interview. Someone's taken the time to tell you their story, and then the writer claims the story and gets all the money and all the credit, and the person whose story it is left with nothing. Now, I personally believe, although there's no law that says if you write someone else's story, you need to credit them, I think to write someone else's story without crediting them is certainly not illegal, but definitely unethical, in my opinion. I mean, other people might disagree, but I think that the days with I think the idea of the author taking someone else's story and using it stems from a time when author was a privileged position and only certain people felt they had the right to write someone's story. So taking someone's story and writing it down was acceptable because probably the person whose biography it was couldn't write it themselves. But now anyone can write their own story, and I think stealing someone's story, because that's what they're doing, they're stealing stories. I think that's not right.
Any of the other panellists, the benefits for the people being written about in works?
I think one of the things that the only reason I started to write, I didn't start to write until I was in my 40s and I had a grandchild, and he was growing up south of Katherine, in that place down south, in a little town in New South Wales. And when I went down to meet him, it was a really racist little town. And so I started to write stories for my grandson because I wanted him to experience what it's like to live in a community where Aboriginal people and white people get along. And all of my books come from that point of view. They're all coming from the point of view of trying to show the life that I lived or that lots of us live in the Northern Territory, where Aboriginal families and white families are mixed. One of the things that I really hate is the word cowboy. People say, oh God, he's such a cowboy. Now, I grew up in a place where cowboys were really gentle, kind men. They were dignified, good blokes. And there's very few of us who live in those communities. And it really, when I think of my brothers, when somebody says cowboy, I feel like punching them in the guts. I just feel, I just go, ah! So in a way, in a very small way, you know, I can understand how people feel when the things that they hold dear are violated like that in public. And it's a really important thing to speak about it, I think.
Yeah, it's a great question. The other two panellists, do you have any thoughts, or shall we move to another question?
Question's sort of like moved out of my head now. I can't think of it.
The question about the people who are being written about, then what are the benefits for them?
Oh, can I just say another thing? I am actually an Aboriginal lesbian. There's more of us than you think. We're actually all down south. Among Aboriginal writers and activists, lesbian seems more common than not these days. But few of us noted that during the same-sex marriage debate, when there's all this stuff about communities of colour not accepting gay people, all of us wondered why no one was asking us. All the Aboriginal, all the people of colour who are professional writers, who our email addresses on the internet. It doesn't take long to find us. No one asks us. That's because they didn't want to know our opinion because they knew it wouldn't fit their narrative. And that's a very important thing. You got to wonder what someone's reason is for the way they actually report
At least
things.
you weren't being written about without your permission. See.
Yeah. We should move to another question, I think, but thanks. That was a great question. Anyone else? Yes, Kath. Yeah.
This is a question for who on the panel would like to respond, but I'm wondering about whether if we could think of a question being also about bigger than the writer. The writers are one part of an environment of reading and creating and so on. There's also readers and publishers and writers' festivals and reviewers, and they've all got choices to make too. And whether perhaps if we have a question here, it is maybe we don't have enough Aboriginal publishers and Aboriginal critics and Aboriginal radio producers who can feed back to writers on whether they have created authentic characters. I don't think writers should contain themselves. I think they should be critiqued, though.
Mm-hmm. I think I was a black and white Indigenous writing fellow out of Queensland, which is an award given to a new unpublished Aboriginal author. I don't think they have to be unpublished, but for new unpublished work. And that involved, as an internship, the author is gets their work edited by an Aboriginal editor. The reason they're doing that is because there's no opportunities for Aboriginal editors to get training. So that the idea of that project was to set it up so that Aboriginal editors could learn to edit. So my first book, this book, was edited for the first round of editing by an entirely Aboriginal team of editors. And that was priceless. I cannot begin to articulate how important that was. To have editors that actually understood the point of view rather than white editors go, what does that mean? Or having editors, just to use one example, one of my editors said this: isn't it amazing to have an editor that you don't have to explain the words Terra Nullius or what the stolen generation was to?
Yeah, I was actually an editor in that program. Yeah, I was. Yeah,
excellent.
Not in your book though, but
no.
yeah. And you know what? The reason why is because there are so few of us in this country to start with, and in terms of our per capita population of us, in terms of non-Indigenous people. So that's why. But there's some bloody good Indigenous publishers and editors out there. There just aren't enough of us.
There's an 100% Aboriginal publishing company as well.
Yeah.
Munkara books. Actually, there's two. There's Munkara and there's IAD books as well. But they don't get enough distribution or enough credit, and people don't make the effort to get the bookshops to get their books in. Like I think it would be a very powerful thing for everyone here, for example, to think of a minority voice and then find a book, you can ask them on the internet, and then go to the bookshop and ask for the bookshop to get them in. You could get them off the internet, but that's not social engineering. If you ask a bookshop to get in a book from a minority voice, then maybe they'll get more books in by a minority voice because they think they might be able to sell them. I assume.
Yes. Thanks to Michael, Marie, Leonie and Claire, and to the Writer Centre, and thank you for being here.